Are there limits to knowledge? We have established that the elements needed to explain reality are to be drawn from the two spheres of perceiving and thinking. As we have seen, we are so organized that the full total reality, including that of ourselves as subjects, initially appears to us as a duality. The act of knowing overcomes this duality by uniting the two elements of reality, the percept and the concept gained by thinking, into the complete thing. Let us call the way in which the world meets us before it has gained its true form through our knowing it, the world of appearance, in contrast to the unified reality composed of percept and concept. We can then say, the world is given to us as a duality, and knowledge transforms it into a monistic unity. A philosophy which starts from this fundamental principle may be called a monistic philosophy, or monism. In contrast to this is the two-world theory, or dualism. Dualism does not assume that there are two sides of a single reality, which are kept apart merely by our organization. Rather, it assumes that there are two worlds absolutely distinct from one another. It then tries to find in one of these two worlds the principles for explaining the other. Dualism rests on a false conception of what we call knowledge. It divides the whole of existence into two spheres, each of which has its own laws, and it sets these two spheres standing apart and opposed from one another. It is from a dualism such as this that there arises the distinction between the perceived object and the thing in itself, which Kant introduced into philosophy, and which, to this day, has not been overcome. According to our line of argument, it is due to the nature of our mental organization that a separate thing can be given to us only as a percept. Thinking then overcomes this separation by assigning to each percept its rightful place in the world as a whole. As long as we designate the separate parts of the world as percepts, we are simply following, in this separating out, a law of our subjectivity. If, however, we regard the sum of all percepts as one part of the world, and then contrast with this a second part, namely the thing in itself, then we are philosophizing into thin air. We are just playing a game with concepts. We are constructing an artificial pair of opposites, and then we fail to find any content for the second of these opposites, since any such content for a particular thing can be drawn only from perception. Every kind of existence that is assumed outside the realm of percepts and concepts must be relegated to the sphere of unjustified hypothesis. The thing in itself belongs to this category. It is not surprising that dualistic thinkers should be unable to find the connection between the world principle, which they assume hypothetically, and the things given in experience. They can only give content to this hypothetical world principle by borrowing this content from the world of experience, and then deceiving themselves about this fact. Otherwise, it remains a concept devoid of content, a non-concept, which has only the form of a concept. At this point, dualistic thinkers usually assert that the content of this concept is inaccessible to our knowledge. We can know only that such a content exists, but we cannot know what exists. In both cases, overcoming dualism is impossible. Even if we import a few abstract elements from the world of experience into the concept of the thing in itself, it still remains impossible to derive the rich concrete life of experience from these few qualities, which themselves are anyway only borrowed from perception. Du Bois-Reymond thinks that the imperceptible atoms of matter produce sensation and feeling by means of their position and motion, and then comes to the conclusion that we can never find a satisfactory explanation as to how matter and motion produce sensation and feeling. Quote, "It is absolutely and forever incomprehensible that a number of atoms of carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, etc. should be anything but indifferent as to how they lie and move, how they lay and moved, and how they will lie and will move. There is no way to understand from their interaction how consciousness could ever arise." End quote. Du Bois-Reymond's argument is characteristic of this whole trend of thought. Position and motion are separated out from the rich world of percepts. They are then transferred to the notional world of atoms, and then astonishment follows that it is impossible to develop concrete life out of this self-made principle, this imitation of the perceptual world. That dualists can reach no explanation of the world, working as they do with the completely empty concept of the in itself of a thing, follows at once from the very definition of their principle. In every case, dualists find themselves compelled to set insurmountable barriers to our faculty of knowing. But a follower of our monistic worldview knows that everything necessary to explain a given world phenomenon must lie within this world itself. What prevents us from reaching it can be only accidental limitations in space and time, or deficiencies in our organization. Not deficiencies in human organization in general, but only deficiencies in our own particular organization. It follows from our definition of the act of knowing that we cannot speak of limits to knowledge. Knowing is not the concern of the world in general, but a transaction that we must each accomplish for ourselves. Things demand no explanation. They exist and work on one another according to laws that thinking can discover. They exist in indivisible unity with these laws. But when we, in our selfhood, our I-hood, initially confront them, we grasp at first only that which we have called percepts. However, within ourselves, within our I-hood, we also find the power to discover the other part of the reality. Knowledge is satisfied only when the self, the I, has united for itself both the elements of reality that are indivisibly connected in the world. For then the self has reached reality once again. Thus the conditions necessary for an act of knowledge are there through and for the I. It is the I that poses the questions for knowledge. And moreover, it takes these questions from an element that is absolutely clear and transparent to it. This element is thinking. Thank you for watching. This reading was an amalgamation of 3 different English translations, 2 of which were from the 1918 edition of this book, 1 of which was from the 1894 edition. Close reference was also made to the original German texts of both the 1894 and 1918 editions.